Charlie Potty from Canada, Halifax, Nova Scotia. You mentioned something that recently, in another talk you gave, the priority of the we over the I. You mentioned, and Pope Francis has mentioned that. That has struck me very much because I think that is in the liturgy. One of my first articles was the we in the liturgy is always the whole community, the assembly, and the whole church, and that there's no I without the we. They're the personal. So I wonder if you might give your input on the importance of that we that Pope Francis is talking about, that you mentioned.
So there are at least two answers that come quickly to mind. One was thanks to the 8 years that I spent in Africa, where because we could take your question and kind of discuss it in purely within the Western tradition, sort of where the we and the I and so forth and individualism and so forth within the Western tradition. But the 8 years I spent in Africa put me in a different context, and there I slowly learned, not because I was involved in academic discussions, but just by living there, I learned that there really was another way of conceiving basic reality. And out of that came a rephrasing, a reformulation of the famous cogito ergo sum, as summus ergo sum, summus ergo sum. And I think that it's not a lesser axiom. In fact, maybe it's a greater axiom than cogito ergo sum. So that's one point, that what you're saying is not just, let's say, paying attention within our tradition, but it goes beyond that to other traditions which already know what you're saying. For them, it's common sense, whereas for us, I think we've been taught out of it. And that links to the second thing, which was a talk I gave a couple of months ago by remote, again in Canada at Carleton University and St. Michael's College, where I had a chance to reflect on the Declaration of Human Rights of the French Revolution, and saw there how they in a sense, they established the elements of a we that is built up out of individuals. That the basic unit of right is the individual. And I think that with that premise, you've lost it. You'll never get it back. You can keep up adding individuals all you like, and you'll never get the we that we're talking about, that I'm sure Jesus was talking about, that the Africans are talking, not about, that's what we means, and what you just said. So radically, your question could be, well, how can we say the liturgy in a context where we is understood instinctively as a sum of individuals? It's not easy. It's not easy, and maybe some of the things we say or some of the expectations we project really do rub the wrong way or don't make sense. I think it's quite a profound problem. So if you read if you reread like what I said or texts of Francis, and you parse the word we over and over again, I think you'll see that it doesn't work if it's the French Revolution we or the positivist we, on which, with all due respect to our cousins to the south, on which the US vision of life seems to be so solidly and non-negotiably based. So it's a big question, I think, a very big question, and a challenge. And maybe one day, 100 years from now, we'll be so mature that we'll see that, yes, that's the individualism actually fits in quite well. But I think we've got a ways to go before that. Right now, I think we're obsessed with it, and it's controlling us.
I'm Jerome Guingant from France. It's not really a question, but I want to stress something. It's a big light for me, particularly within the Society of Jesus. You said that liturgy and mission should work together and give guarantee one to the other. And to make this link between liturgy and mission, I found it very strong within the Society of Jesus. And also to stress the place of the liturgy in society. Mission, we know that we are all sent in mission, whatever mission could be, with the poor, with the rich, etc. But this link of guarantee, I would say, which binds both of them. And it's a strong light for me as a liturgist in the Society of Jesus. Thanks.
Thank you. One of the, I think Father mentioned this book, Fraternità, which in English will be Siblings All, Sign of the Times, will be published by Orbis in November. And here I made a discovery that I would have never expected. We wrote the book together with a young Italian theologian in Italian, and it published in Italian. And afterwards, I got busy with the English translation. And it was only when doing the English translation that I realized that whereas in Italian and in French, the word pastoral or pastorale is both an adjective and a noun, in English, pastoral is only an adjective, or if it's a noun, it means something else. So I began to think that maybe this anomaly has also contributed to some of our confusion about the council, because the council was a pastoral council. But if we don't know what the word pastoral means, or if we think it's just an adjective, which means an adjective which means parish, then we really we're missing the heart of the council, and we're missing, well, finally we're getting mixed up about the gospel and our missioners. And I think Jesuits, I speak for myself, I think when, at least in our English-speaking version, I don't know what actually happened in French or in Italian, but as English-speaking Jesuits, I'm quite sure that we tended to, in a certain sense, sideline pastoral because it was parochial. And since we were in schools and retreat houses and other important things, it really didn't mean very much to us. And until, or unless, I think, you recover what the word pastoral really means, I don't know how you can understand the council, and I don't know how you can understand the Pope. Unfortunately, you could understand previous popes, but you can't understand this one. There you go. So going back to Jesuits, and here is, I mean, you could have a whole nother meeting about this, but probably it shouldn't be recorded, which would be about the place of liturgy in our community life and in our apostolic life, and how we say Mass and all that. I mean, is I think finally included in the point that you were lifting up and raising, and I don't think it's the most important thing for us to do. But we can't also leave it in kind of incoherence or contradiction with the more important things that we do or say. And I think right now it is a bit à côté.
Thank you very much, Cardinal. I'm Rocco Connor, Jesuit from Bellarmine Retreat House near Chicago. This is more of a comment to see what you'd say. I can talk about the liturgy and what we should do all day long. About we. It appears to me that, especially in the United States, until we discover the despair at the bottom of individualism, which we avoid assiduously, there is no door to the we. And it's almost like Jesus descending into hell and saying, oh, here's the back door. That we have yet to descend into hell individually. Now that ain't much fun. I believe that's where conversion happens. And as we discover that place where to encounter Christ risen and that despair from which to engage liturgical praying. Just a thought.
The thought that triggers in me is an experience, and actually maybe even a shared conviction that we've had in the migrants and refugees section where I worked for 5 years, and where practically from the start we intuited, we previewed that in the terrible ideological abuse or misuse of migrants and refugees, the xenophobia and the racism and all that, in that context, especially in the media, that there was no way out. But discussion was not the way out. In other words, we would not be able to make much or any progress in resisting or attacking the ideology at the level of discourse, but realized that the only effective response would be good practices. I heard what you said, but here's what actually happened in the outskirts of Birmingham, Alabama, or this is what actually happened on the border with San Diego, or this is what actually is happening on the American-Canadian border. This is a story. Here's the story. And just keep repeating the stories. And so I think that might be it's not a direct, but a valid answer to your response to your reflection, which is that it's what you say is true, but it's also true that our church life and our parish life is actually made up of counter-narratives to the one that you articulated a meta-narrative, which was very upsetting, but there are real narratives which deny that. Not by arguing, they just contradict it. It's not the whole truth, it doesn't apply here. Actually, it's not very interesting. A waste of time. This is more interesting. So that, I think, brings us back to what pastoral really means. See, that pastoral is not a place for debate or a diatribe or there's a whole other way of understanding or living pastoral that, again, I feel in some degree we have missed, although I would be interested to hear from somebody who's listening to me now in English, but who speaks primarily French or Italian or even Slavic language, whether you feel that this question of what pastoral really means as a noun, and what it means coming from the name of the council and the pastoral constitution and pastoral this and pastoral that in Vatican II. I mean, whether that has struck you or whether this is just a kind of a linguistic thing that I've run into.
Thank you. Being primarily an English speaker, I can't quite immediately respond to your invitation and hope others will. I had signaled for the mic already. I'm Bruce Marl, United States, Nashville, Tennessee, Jesuit working there. I'm grateful for the insight that you graciously and humbly shared with us of what you learned in having to prepare the talk. And if I understood correctly, or the piece I want to pick up, is how what liturgical scholars and pastoral ministers have been trying to do for 60 years has been so difficult because the other 15 documents of the Second Vatican Council have yet to really get underway in a strong sense, a global sense. And what I'm making now are really comments, not a question. But I was very moved as you quoted at great length almost the entire second Eucharistic prayer for reconciliation. And I use it exclusively during the season of Advent and the season of Lent, but find I use it even a great deal this Easter season because our second reading was from the book of Revelation. And as you quoted, so much of that second half of it is from Revelation. So there are two thoughts, and one is very much as a liturgical scholar, interest, pastor, would that we found, I don't know how it can happen, but that'll be my second point. I find that very few Jesuit or any other priests use that Eucharistic prayer. That's my experience. And I also find that the problem, as much as I'm inspired and others can be inspired by the content of the long Eucharistic prayers or anaphori, they're just not heard by people. So it's just a comment of despair. I'm entirely with you. I write books and articles and I do the same thing. But it's a plea, I guess. It's a plea to God and the Spirit. How? And there was the suggestion, John Baldwin was one of my teachers, that we need, and we started practicing in Berkeley 25, 30 years ago, Eucharistic prayers that were antiphonal so that people could stay engaged. And then, of course, in 2004, Redemptionis Sacramentum calls this an abuse, and it's not to happen. And I think that gets to your we again. Are we the people praying this prayer, or is it Father? Yeah. So, okay, low-hanging fruit, I just grabbed it. But the positive point I want to bring is why, for me, I find myself so attracted to that prayer, or the fourth one for special occasions, is out of my own hunger and need, which I think speaks to your talk, which I just can't thank you enough for it. And I guess that's the great hope, is if that we can keep searching for how what we find we need from God. You said the Pope's helpful term, it's not what we desire for ourselves, it's need. We'll start to find those resources in the prayer. So I conclude just with a story. I'm in Nashville, Tennessee, and the state of Tennessee, I knew I was preaching to and praying with people who, at the rate of 88%, twice voted for Donald Trump. I just offer that to you as a symbol. It's a fact. And so I would constantly use Eucharistic prayer 2 or 4 to reinforce what I preached in the homily, because I was given material every week that was so individualistic, divisive, dismissive, and trying to say, this isn't just some, and I get a lot of listen to me, but I have to say it. I'm no longer invited to work at that church, incidentally, the parish where I was helping, because it was it just wasn't, So it's that need, and that now I've started rambling. Thank you.
I think a lot of people were agreeing with you.
Thank you very much, Cardinal. I really liked your presentation. It was excellent. And you raised 2 points that just like to make a comment on. I'm Dennis Smolarski from the West Coast, U.S. province. One is talk about how do you translate pastoral liturgy into English correctly from the original and what the implications are. Years ago, I read something that said that we mistranslated the name of the center in Paris, I guess, the Center for Pastoral Liturgy, but liturgy there is not the noun, it's the adjective. And if people understand that it's a center for understanding how we do a pastoral outreach, a pastoral practice liturgically, then it changes the idea of what we're doing. And I appreciate the fact that you reinforced what I thought I read years ago. The second thing is about individualism, that so many people think in terms of the I rather than the we. And I reflected back on something I picked up a few years ago with Alexei de Tocqueville and his analysis of the American political system when he came in the mid-1800s and looked at the U.S. and said that it's characterized not by any type of government that they knew in Europe at that point, but by individualism, that people are trying to also make groups. But I think one of the worst things that the U.S. has done is we've exported a lot of good things, but we've also exported this political idea that the I is primary rather than the we. And thank you for raising these issues again.
Very good. Well, let me share with you the solution. The solution I came up with in the translation is that when the Italian says pastorale as a noun, then it's always translated pastoral life, which was, so I hope you think that was a good solution. Before I take another point, I would just like to embarrass my two guests who are not Jesuits and who come from the jungle in Peru. And while one of them speaks Italian and Spanish, the other one speaks pretty good English. So if he would like to say something, we would be happy.
Buenas tardes con todos. Good afternoon to everybody. Thanks, Cardinal. Cardinal Michael and I have known each other for
7 years.
100 years. I was also very moved and very inspired by your talk. It was absolutely wonderful. In Peru, of course, we have our liturgy is much more on the African style of liturgy, lots of movement, but it's an extremely important issue. I said, oh, gosh, she's going to talk about liturgy. To be honest, I said, but I go because I want to see Michael, But anyway, it's really, I thank you so very much that you have pointed out some issues that are extreme. I knew you a long time ago. I'm from Antigonish, Nova Scotia, so we're pretty good. We're being recorded, sorry. I just want to thank you again and say that, it is a very important issue that we haven't solved yet enough. We finally got where we are in the Latin American Spanish after so many years of vosotros sois, the Spanish. So that was a big move. But again, I think your question of immigrants and marginated people in liturgy is really important. We wondered why the Venezuelan immigrants are not going to Mass. It's a big, extremely important question where we are, because there's a lot of, what are we not doing to receive, welcome and so forth. What are we not doing? I think it's really very important questions. And the Fratelli Tutti is very relevant and very present in our area as in liturgy. Are we really welcoming people into the liturgy? Why are we so afraid to start over again? the post-pandemic times. They are so interesting. I mean, our catechetical groups are exploding, which is wonderful. I mean, so we have to be really on top of the question as we prepare them for these sacraments, but prepare them in a way that will be life-giving, and especially anti-xenophobic issues that are so relevant and now and then. So, Michael, thank you so very much.
Cardinal, thank you very much for your talk. My name is Philip Gannier. I'm a U.S. West Jesuit. I'm doing doctoral studies at Catholic University in Washington, D.C. And I'm so happy that you had mentioned the Angels Unaware bronze sculpture, because they just installed it at Catholic U, and I was very pleased to see that. And it has, my comment really is to do with your mentioning art, and how I really appreciate how you bridge art and liturgy together, and that art is not something that's just for the elites to enjoy, but that art, when it really is tuned to truth, I mean, it really does kind of arrest us, and it moves us forward. And this is my second time to Rome, and yesterday when I was with a friend, he said that one of the great things about art in our tradition is that art has not stopped. And I think that's important to remind us, because sometimes in my context, when you think of sacred art, they kind of stop at the Baroque. They stop at the neoclassical tradition. But I'm really glad and so delighted that you brought that to our attention, and you linked it to the older stuff in our tradition too. Thank you.
I'm honored to be here, Cardinal. I'm Paul Genowiak. I teach liturgy in Berkeley. And I'm intrigued by this whole adjective, noun, pastoral thing. And this was just an initial thought, and I don't know if it would go anywhere, but it's pastoral not as a hat that one puts on, a ministry to people, but actually an identity, a ministry of our mission as one body and one spirit in Christ. So I just offered that suggestion.
I think the test for our understanding of the word pastoral is, have we got it to the point where it is worthy to be the title, the designation of the most recent ecumenical council? And if we've got an understanding of it, says, yes, that is why we had a council, not just an encyclical or a workshop or even a synod, but a whole council whose very name has the word pastoral in it. If we understand that word sufficiently so that that's not just a sound that you skip over, which I think is what has happened. It certainly happens in English, because I mean, even if you don't think about it, you can be sure that a pastoral council can't mean parochial. It can't mean that, which is what the word means in English. So it must mean something else, but then you go on to other things and you never stop to ask, well, what does it mean then? But if you're translating your own book, well, you have to figure out what it means. So that's why, finally, at this very late stage, I wondered about that.
Yeah, if I can add to that, if I can piggyback on that. First of all, lest I forget, I want to thank you profoundly for telling us or reminding us that conversion begins with us, because that's so essential to our integration of the four apostolic preferences. We really need conversion, all of us. But the other thing I wanted to say in connection with what you just said, look at how many of the commentators on the council in English dismiss the pastoral. This was not a doctrinal council, they say, and it's a way of dismissing. And I think that's something that we have to provide some kind of a good answer to. It's in line with what you've just been saying. It's a dismissal, and you brought up at the very end of your talk, and you reflect so much the mind of Pope Francis, which is terrific, how the liturgy, dismissal of the liturgy is also, the current liturgy is dismissal of the council. And he is repeating that constantly. He just repeated it the other day, I see, to the European journalists.
Me a blow for it.
My name is Andy Nguyen. I'm a Jesuit of Australian province. I work in a parish in North Sydney. Thank you for your presentation, and I think it's gave me an inspiration about, you talk about displacement, people who are displaced and refugees, and our worship space communicate permanence, and how do we have a theology of displacement that communicate the people on the move, but then the liturgy is also a kind of a home for people. So I'm just interested in just an idea that come into my head about how our liturgy without walls, for example, that is providing a home for people on the move to a place of pilgrimage. So thank you.
For that,
to the comment. Yeah.
Now that allows me, we still have a few minutes? 5 minutes. That reminds me of another one of these things that I've been mulling over for a long time, and you guys probably have been thinking about it a lot. And that is that one of the difficulties that you have, but also in other parts of church life after the council, I think, is that what we understand by a parish is basically a village parish. That the parishes that we have founded since we stopped living in villages, that is to say in cities, are basically village churches that cover little territory, and everybody who lives in that village is supposed to go to that church and know each other and marry each other and do everything together. And that's how we've organized the church in our cities. And then the migrants come along and don't fit into that. But maybe the grace is that the model is no longer, hasn't been relevant since the Industrial Revolution, because the people came from villages, but they didn't move into city villages. They moved into cities, and it's only 200 or 300 years. So we haven't figured out yet what it means to have a parish in a city. We still think that, or we set them up like village churches. And now we're closing them like village churches when people don't live in the village anymore. Whereas the migrants are actually the leaders, because they live in a more dramatic way what many of our people live. In other words, the rootlessness and the horizonlessness of refugees is actually a parable of what a lot of our people live with, and that we are not addressing. So the idea that a parish life or diocesan life can make an effort to incorporate the people who are, in general, all these people that I talk about in the paper, we sum up as vulnerable people on the move. Vulnerable people on the move. Now, those of you who are in pastoral ministry, doesn't that pretty much cover the people, your people? Aren't they vulnerable people on the move? They're vulnerable people on the move, first of all. And so, to skip then to the punchline, when I'm talking to bishops, and we're talking about the people moving through, and I say, well, now let's imagine somebody who leaves Guatemala and finally reaches Cincinnati. How many churches have they gone through? And then I wait for a while, and then I say, the right answer is one. They've only been there. It's one church. Are we organized? Are we working together in such a way that the person who leaves Guatemala and arrives in Cincinnati has been accompanied seamlessly? Because it's only one church, isn't it? So you could say the same thing of a city. And I think we need, there's plenty, none of us will be unemployed. There's at least 200 or 300 years of work ahead of us. How to reshape this body of Christ in the world in such a way that we actually can accompany our people who are, in their vast majority, especially the ones we should be paying attention to, vulnerable people on the move. Anyway, that's a thought.
Thank you, Cardinal, for your wonderful talk. My name is Mark Francis. I'm the President Emeritus of Catholic Theological Union in Chicago. One of the things you said that kind of piqued my interest was the fact that there are some aspects of the council that weren't fully implemented, and therefore that prevented our liturgical ministry to bear as much fruit as it could. I've also read that this whole move of the Pope for synodality is a way of fully enacting the inherent ecclesiology of Vatican II. Could you kind of elaborate on perhaps the connection between the two?
Buy my book.
I was a plant, actually. No, I wasn't.
That's the story. That's the story. In other words, Christian is the name. Christian and I set out on this project. We realized, because he's less than half my age, and as we were talking, we realized that while we both talked about the council, we knew it very differently. I lived through it, and he studied it. And eventually we realized that the Pope was very rooted in the council, but only somebody who had studied it or who had attentively lived through it would realize that. So we prepared a proposal for him and said, we would like to write up or in a certain sense, unveil your roots in the council. What do you think? He said, sure, go ahead. So we started writing that book. Then, without consulting us, he published Fratelli Tutti. And so we couldn't just talk about the roots of Pope Francis in the council. We also had to talk about the culmination of his magisterium, Fratelli Tutti. And so the book is From Vatican II to Fratelli Tutti, or From Ecumenical Council to Synodality. So that's the story. Orbis, November.
You should be able to promote your own book. I think the quality of...
Christian's book, and I also signed it.
Good. I think the quality, Cardinal Czerny, the quality of our conversation, our questions, our comments reflect the quality of your presentation. We know how incredibly busy you are, and yet your talk really manifested such a great deal of preparation. So we're really honored that you've been able to spend this time with us, and that you spent so much time preparing to address us, your brother Jesuits and our friends. So let's express once again our thanks to Cardinal Czerny.